Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Netanyahu plans a full occupation of Gaza but says he does not want to govern the Strip. Trump and Putin could meet within days with a three-way Ukraine peace summit now on the table. And sweeping tariffs take effect. The US president targets more than 90 countries and warns tech firms to bring production home or face a 100% import tax. Now, Israel's Security Cabinet has met to vote on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's controversial plan for a full takeover of Gaza. Despite criticism from some ministers, reports suggest Netanyahu is likely to secure majority support for the operation. Families of those held captive are staging protests near the Gaza border, calling the talks a death cabinet meeting. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster in Surrey and deputy editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray, who does join us from London. Great to have you both on the show. Isabel, let's start with you. So earlier today, Netanyahu was speaking to Fox News and he told them he planned to take full control over Gaza. However, he said Israel wants a security parameter. How exactly, Isabel, will this work in theory?
Well, there are huge questions about all of this. And of course, it raises serious alarm bells. Why are we not talking about ending the situation in Gaza? Why is the discussion suddenly about expanding it? And of course, from the perspective of those living in the Gaza Strip, there will be concern. 88% already controlled by the Israelis. What on earth is going to happen if and when some sort of security perimeter is put in place? Now, he's done this interview, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's done an interview with Fox News. Interesting that the Americans hear first about his thoughts before his own people, but that's another matter. And he has spoken to them and has said that he's not interested in occupying, he's not interested in governing. This is a temporary move. This would be in his words, controlled by Arab forces. But there are legitimate questions about how indeed that would work. Now, expanding in the way that has been largely trailed today has sort of raised concerns about those Israeli hostages that are in places like Gaza City and that have so far been untouched by the Israelis. And this evening, Hamas has come out and said that basically this is a death warrant for those remaining hostages signed by the War Cabinet if this is approved tonight.
Yes, indeed. We have had a statement from Hamas, as you did say, Isabel, accusing the Israeli Prime Minister of sacrificing hostages for personal interest. But Freddie, Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz has said the Israeli military must carry out any government decisions. We do know, and we have discussed in the past, these tensions between the IDF chief and Benjamin Netanyahu himself. Could we see possibly soldiers refusing to take part in a full occupation of Gaza?
Well, it's probably a bit too soon to predict soldiers refusing to take part, but there certainly are tensions within Israel about what the correct strategy is. And these are being reflected by a lot of opposition towards Netanyahu domestically. And I think this is, as we've discussed before, I think this is sort of the bubbling story of this crisis, is that Netanyahu does have a political crisis hanging over him. He has these corruption charges hanging over him and so on. And he's managed to buy himself a lot of time during this war. But I do think there is a growing opposition to Israel's strategy in Gaza. And I think that Netanyahu is going to face the possibility of regime change, will be putting it too strongly perhaps, but something similar in the coming weeks if he cannot pull together his already very difficult coalition.
Yes, exactly. And Isabel, I don't know if we can pick up on that point from Freddy about regime change in Israel. And obviously, this war has gone on for much longer than was predicted by many of the Israeli people. And I wonder right now, is Freddy right? Is a possible regime change something that we could foresee happening?
Well, I think a lot of people would like to see that. Personally, I think it's unlikely. Yes, we've seen consistent survey results coming out of Israel that people living there actually want an end to this war. They want to see the hostages as a priority, which this move tonight, if it is agreed by his Security Council, will not be prioritising. But I think that's the key. It's likely to get a majority of support. And at the moment, he still carries that support. And he's very much got the backing of the United States. So to me, he seems safe at the moment. I don't think that's right. I think that, whilst we've been talking in the last few moments, we've seen repeated pictures of children starving. And I think that, he bears huge responsibility for that. And that's not my own words. That's from eyewitness testimony of surgeons who've been in there in recent weeks and have witnessed unspeakable things. That's the words of the World Health Organization, the United Nations, Médecins Sans Frontières as well, expressing their concerns about starvation, malnutrition, famine in the region. And of course, that's why the International Criminal Court have an arrest warrant out for him, because he stands accused of using starvation as a weapon of war and for mass murder. So, will there be a regime change? I don't think so, but perhaps there should be.
And Freddy, I was just wondering there, when we think of support for Israel on the international stage, as Isabel said, the US has always fully backed Israel, but we've seen international pressure from lots of different countries, the UK, France and Canada saying they're willing to recognize a Palestinian state. What do we think the outcome from the US will be? Will they stick to the fact that Israel, as Trump says, can do what they wish when it comes to full occupation?
I think it's highly unlikely that Donald Trump will turn on Israel. I think it's possible that the Trump administration will get fed up with Netanyahu. And there are definite indications from Washington that the Trump administration are irritated with Netanyahu taking them for a ride on certain things, particularly after the Iran strikes, where the Trump administration thought we've done something that Israel, that Netanyahu was pressing them to do. And then he starts behaving in quite a rogue way as far as the Americans are concerned. So I think America's not going to turn against Israel. I think America might not even support a two-state solution, or might not even regard a two-state solution as viable. But what they might do is say, Netanyahu is out of control.
Stay right there. Thank you for your thoughts on that as we move on to another story now. And Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin could meet within days to discuss ending the war in Ukraine, according to the Kremlin. It comes as Trump's ceasefire deadline for Russia nears, with sweeping sanctions looming if the talks do fail. Trump has floated the idea of a three-way summit with Zelensky and with Putin, which Ukraine says it does support. Putin has named the United Arab Emirates as a possible host for the meeting. And when asked directly about the potential meeting, including where it might take place and whether Zelensky would attend, Putin had just this to say.
Your aide, Yuri Ushakov, said the meeting was likely to be held next week. But where? Could you at least hint at this place?
We have a lot of friends that are ready to help us organize such an event. Here is one of our friends, the President of the United Arab Emirates. I think we will decide later, but this could be one of the suitable venues.
And what about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky? Will you hold the meeting with him?
I have been repeatedly saying that I, in general, have nothing against it. This is possible, but before that, certain conditions should be created. And unfortunately, we are still far from creating such conditions.
So there we are, Freddy, just hearing from the Russian president. And we have been waiting for a leaders' summit for months now, pretty much since Donald Trump did come back into power. It could even include Zelensky. Is this a sign that the end of the war could possibly be in sight, or a ceasefire?
There's a long way to go, but I don't think we should be too skeptical or dismissive about this just because it's Donald Trump and there's the usual craziness. I mean, again, Trump has applied leverage over Putin, particularly with his tariffs on India, but also by rearming Ukraine. He has put pressure on the Russians to come to the table, and the Russians have come to the table. Everybody likes to say that Putin is always playing Trump. I think that's debatable. I think they're both playing each other all the time. But what we could see in the next few days is a meeting between Trump and Putin, possibly in the UAE, we'll see. And then after that, a trilateral meeting between Zelensky, Putin, and Trump. And if he manages to get those two leaders in a room together, I think we do have to start saying he is capable of achieving things that nobody else thinks he's capable, that people doubt him of being able to achieve.
Freddie and Isabel, I ask you this. Don't you think that when it comes to Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, it's all about the optics and it's all about the show? And we do know that Russia hasn't actually, as far as we know, given any concessions. And now, all of a sudden, Vladimir Putin is back on the world stage with the world's most powerful man.
Yeah, I think there is a debate to be had about who has come out on top from this big turnaround, but turnaround it is, because just a couple of days ago, there was Russia looking at this deadline looming tomorrow, at seeing further sanctions being placed on them. And suddenly, Putin has eyed an advantage there and come out and announced and told the world that he's going to be attending an international summit. Suddenly he's welcomed back into the international forum. Now, he's been a pariah for years. Nobody has wanted to meet with him, barely phone calls. So, what a transformation here. But also in terms of what, Trump has achieved and could achieve, I think there's a lot of ifs still, respectfully, in what Freddie has said there. Fantastic if the three of them can sit down, Trump, Zelensky and Putin. But, Putin already making it clear that there are a lot of conditions that haven't yet been met before that can happen from Russia's perspective. And, also from Trump's point of view, let's not forget that he made promises during the election campaign that he would fix the whole thing within 24 hours. Well, we're on day 198 and we're still in a war situation, and Ukraine is still fighting for its life. So, both of them can pat themselves on the back, but I think there's still a long way to go, unfortunately.
Well, actually, earlier I spoke to John Cavalage, a senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight. I asked him if this meeting paves the way for a ceasefire. Take a listen to what he said.
There's no question that what drives President Trump is performance. He goes back to his television days with NBC, with The Apprentice. For him, this is the optics. There are, on the Ukrainian side and some in the European Union will be saying, hey, this is a reward for President Putin. President Trump will be looking at it saying this is a reward for President Trump. And if something comes out of it, great. But the mere fact that we're having dialogue, he will shift back and say, under the Biden administration, they weren't even talking. And now at least we're sitting across from one another and talking.
So, Freddie, do you think that John's right there? We should give peace a chance, and Donald Trump has got dialogue going, and the Nobel Peace Prize could possibly be his?
Well, I always think give peace a chance. And I think even if it's coming from a figure like Donald Trump, who is obviously chaotic, confusing, and so on, I think the president that's trying to pursue peace is better than what Joe Biden was doing, which was such a muddle. It was initially he was reluctant to support Ukraine, and then the US found itself sort of being drawn into this conflict in a very complicated way. And the Western position at the moment, while nobody wants to say it, is that this war will just carry on indefinitely, with thousands and thousands of people dying every month. And that's not a moral position. And so I think, while obviously nobody wants to see Vladimir Putin being rewarded for invading a sovereign country, apart from Vladimir Putin, of course, the overall picture is that you can either want this war to carry on, which is terrible and it's killing people and it's destroying a country, or you can try and end it. And I prefer the Trump position of trying to end it.
And Isabel, if we just go back to the fact that Trump did put a deadline on Russia and also threatened sanctions, and that is actually tomorrow, the deadline, and all of a sudden we've seen all this movement. Do you think it was Steve Witkoff's visit? Did you think it was the threat of secondary sanctions? How have we got to this point? It was a pretty dramatic turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's to be debated, but I don't think, I'm sure Witkoff would love to pat himself on the back and say this is all down to his incredible diplomacy. But this is a guy who plays golf with Trump. He's a billionaire. He's a real estate magnate. He's not a diplomat. And he's been to Moscow 4 times already this year. And, there have been lots of false dawns. So let's not give him too much credit. Nevertheless, of course, with Freddie, I always want to give peace a chance. I really hope and would like to see for the Russian soldiers as well, many of them victims, but for the Ukrainians, of course, primarily, to see an end to this needless bloodshed. But I just find what really sticks in my throat and really makes me feel a bit sick, to be perfectly blunt, is that here we are talking about Putin possibly having a bilateral, possibly a trilateral, and being given the red carpet treatment, when just a few weeks ago we saw the war hero Zelensky being humiliated and bullied on the world stage in the White House. How is it that there are such terrible double standards? How does Putin do this? And I think at the end of the day, you have to say he is the master manipulator here. And I think that, it is something that we should all remember, is how Trump treated Zelensky and whether or not actually Ukraine could stand to be in a vulnerable position with the two of them meeting without somebody from Ukraine being represented.
Yes, indeed. Or actually from someone from Europe too. Lots of questions about that upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. We still don't have a date yet, but possibly next week. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Let's move on now to another story. And it's tariff day in America as Donald Trump's sweeping import taxes take effect on over 90 countries. The US president says billions are now flowing into the US, touting tariffs as a tool to bring jobs and manufacturing home. India, Taiwan and Switzerland have all been hit with new levies, while tech firms like Apple face pressure to shift production stateside. Trump is also threatening a 100% tariff on foreign-made chips unless companies commit to building them in the US. Earlier, I asked economist Susanna Streeter how the markets were reacting to the news.
Street seems to be shrugging off the impact of these tariffs. But remember, a lot of the valuations that are really supporting the Wall Street gains that we've seen. But in the background, we do have these concerns bubbling along, particularly, in so-called Main Street, real America, about the fact that these tariffs are going to lead to higher prices for American consumers. There are expectations that the US economy is slowing. The labor market data show that the jobs market is weakening. So I do think actually that there could be even more volatility ahead as the bigger implications of Trump's tariff wars become clear.
Isabel, let's start with you. So South Asia seems to have been hit particularly hard by these tariffs. Is this because of their affiliation to China?
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, China has very much protected itself, not least after the first term of Donald Trump. The last time he was in the White House, they've done a lot to try and protect and shelter their economy, but also in the wake of COVID-19, when they were absolutely smashed by, nobody buying or selling for a long time. So they use a lot of these third countries. It's called transshipping. The Americans, the Washington administration, describe it as China plus one country. So we're talking about Cambodia, Vietnam. There are other countries on that list, Malaysia, Indonesia, and they actually stand to be the worst affected. I think actually China will be quite well insulated from this latest round, but they, whilst these countries have benefited hugely from this process that China have been using their cheaper labor, and they've been trying to take advantage of that, they will be hit by these tariffs, and it is causing concerns and worries for the market. Businesses like certainty. They don't like to see, anxiety on the markets. And, there is a lot of chaos surrounding this Liberation Day round 2.
And Freddie, we saw India being targeted earlier this week, but it's come with a caveat regarding Russian oil, hasn't it?
Well, yes. So I mean, if you want to know where the leverage has come from to get Putin to the negotiating table, it's in those tariffs on India. And I think what's going on, and it's very difficult to read because Trump is always playing two games. He's playing the economic game with tariffs, which is he believes that they bring in masses of revenue. At midnight last night, he tweeted, "Tariffs are now active, billions of dollars are flooding into the USA." And at the same time, he's playing geopolitics with tariffs. And I think that's really the more subtle game, which is he is trying to use the threat of tariffs to achieve what he wants for America on the world stage. It's very worth noting that the BRIC countries, we always talk about the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Apart from China, they were all, China and Russia, sorry, which are both waiting on a decision on the tariffs. They were all targeted with this latest upping of the tariffs. So is he trying to use his tariff agenda to break up the BRICS, which are the great power rival to America? I think he probably is. There's great risk that it could backfire.
And Freddie, when you talk about BRICS there, I think about soft power when it comes to America. And we also saw US aid being cut to certain countries across Africa and across the world with Donald Trump's cost-cutting measures within the government. And I don't know if you think this, but could China possibly take over soft power when it comes to the BRICS countries?
Well, I think probably not, because most countries that deal with China at some point realize that it's not a benevolent superpower. However, I do think if America keeps acting in an increasingly mercantilist, aggressive way on trade, it is possible that some American soft power will be diminished, because Russia and India are talking to each other at the moment, and they are saying, what are we going to do about this crazy man, Donald Trump? Let's work together to try and negotiate these tariffs that he's imposing against us. So it is possible that Trump's very unpredictable style, while it is capable of achieving spectacular results, like even possibly peace in Ukraine, we'll see about that, it is having a long-term effect, which is that the rivals to American power are coming together because they increasingly see America as an unreliable partner.
And Isabel, the UK was one of the first countries to strike a deal when it came to the tariffs with America. The EU have also got a deal in principle. They must be so relieved today, right, that they haven't been hit with a punishingly higher tariff.
Yes, but I think that relief will be short-lived, because we've seen with Trump, sometimes he takes these stances, he falls out spectacularly with countries, and then he makes up with them. You never quite know where you stand with him. Can you fully trust him? Now, yes, it's great that we're on, I think, 10% is the talk of tariffs for us and for the EU. But will that stand? Will we maintain that relationship? Fingers crossed, because goodness knows we could really do without a huge levy being put on any of our goods going into the United States. But we're certainly in a better position than, for example, our great allies in Canada, who have now had a week of 35%. And, Mark Carney there saying, I can talk about this when I can make sense of it, which is to say, no time soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your thoughts on the tariffs that are coming into play. Now, let's move on to another story. The first group of migrants have been detained under the UK's new deportation deal with France. The so-called one-in, one-out plan was announced by leaders Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron last month. Earlier today, the British Home Secretary did not confirm how many migrants were being held in removal centres, but reiterated that anyone who arrives illegally will be immediately detained and returned. Freddie, let's start with you here. Now, what are your thoughts on this new one-in, one-out scheme? Will it work, and will it stop the boats? Will it deter people?
Well, my rather perverse thought on this is that we've all spent the last few years in Britain listening to governments come up with plans as to how they're going to stop the boats crisis. And all these plans sound great and never happen. The advantage that this one in, one out plan has is that it sounded terrible from the beginning. And so expectations are very low as to its success. And it looks as though there are actions being taken, and that's what Labour desperately wants to achieve, is to prove that they are getting tough on the border, they're doing what the British public want. But, people in Westminster are calling it the 20 in, 1 out policy. And I think that seems to be more likely. We'll see small, very theatrical removals of people who are not supposed to be here. But we're going to continue to see those numbers ticking up because those numbers keep ticking up of illegal arrivals in the country.
And Isabel, as of last month, more than 25,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats this year alone. Like Freddy says, it's ticking up 49% higher than last year. Do you think people see the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, just as a soft touch?
Well, I presume, there's discussion around this because he was a lefty lawyer, the chief prosecutor for the CPS, and, they're the reason that we're having these problems, aren't they? That's what the argument is. No, I don't think so at all. I think, to be perfectly honest, if there is going to be a deterrent, it is taking your life in your hands when you cross the channel. And if you're prepared to put your child in there, and we've seen children drown tragically trying to get to the United Kingdom, then will you care what the deterrent is and the legal position? I don't think so. That's the ultimate deterrent. And if people aren't put off by losing their lives, then whether it's Rishi Sunak sending you to Rwanda, Boris Johnson's plan, Rishi Sunak saw it through or nearly did, or whether it's Keir Starmer's 1 in, 1 out, I just don't think that they'll work as a deterrent personally. But I do think that this is the challenge of our age. I think, there are wider reasons why we're seeing this increase in people trying to move around the globe. It's not just into the United Kingdom. Of course, France gets a huge proportion of their own illegal migrants trying to stay in the country. These are just the ones that don't want to stay there. And let's not forget that under Keir Starmer's premiership, actually, we've seen net migration halve, which is not insignificant because it was at an all-time high. Illegal migration is actually a tiny proportion of that. So, it's worth keeping it in perspective. I think the challenge is significant. I don't think he's got it under control by any means. But I don't think at the moment, genuinely, that people see him as a soft touch. I think if they were worried, they'd be worried about taking their life in their hands.
And Freddy, right now, as Isabel said, we are going to be seeing this new scheme come into play. But what does it look like? Deportation centres, it's 1 in, 1 out. But how exactly is it going to work? Because I feel like the finer details of this is what the Conservatives are really criticising back in the UK.
Well, of course, the Conservatives are on dodgy ground themselves because they didn't fix this problem at all. I think the actual mechanics of how the 1 in, 1 out deal works are mysterious. And actually, when you dig into it, you realise that it's not 1 in, 1 out. It is, we will remove one person, but we will then take someone who's a legitimate claimant. And it's because Labour don't want to look inhumane by turning away legitimate claimants. But the problem is that's not going to stop the boats. Labour's initial plan was to smash the gangs, which means smash the migrant gangs. And it is perhaps true that France and Britain are working closer together on smashing migrant gangs in North Africa, the people who are behind this sort of flow of people. But, I don't think this plan adds up to much. And I think most of the British public agree. I think even Labour ministers don't seem to support it very much.
No, but I do think that there is an important point that I haven't seen much, newspaper coverage or commentary about today, and that is that in this one-in, one-out scheme, the idea is that anyone that's crossed illegally will be immediately sent back to France, and then from France, under this agreement, we will receive an approved asylum seeker. Now, I've done countless interviews over the years discussing this issue, and I've always asked whoever's been in power, hang on a minute, what are the safe and legal routes for those genuine asylum seekers, those people in the Sudan, which have strong links to the United Kingdom, trying to flee oppression, whatever else it might be? You know, we have a long and proud history of offering refuge to people when they're fleeing from war, and we should continue to do that. And I think that this is a part of this particular scheme, which actually is to be praised, because there's been for too long not enough emphasis put on supporting those people who are fighting for their lives. But whether or not, that will be recognised, I think that's to be discussed and remains to be seen.
Yes, indeed. And we will actually be talking about this a lot more in the future, I'm sure. And finally, Isabel and Freddy have come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. This is always the favourite part of the show. Isabel, now you've got a story about a teenage millionaire.
I do, yes. This is 15-year-old Alex Butler, who came up with an incredible game to play when he was just 7 years old. Now, let me tell you, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and I've been looking at her today thinking, are we underachieving here? The idea he came up with is called Burrito versus Taco. He sold 1.5 million copies of this game, and he sold the game itself to Play Monster for, wait for it, $1.1 million. Apparently, he's been quoted as saying he's not very attached to the game and he just wants to buy a Lamborghini, which sounds, typically sort of youthful approach and relaxed approach to it all. But there's also been lots of chat about his parents, actually, the serial entrepreneurs themselves, whether or not, I hate to say it, they perhaps were profiteering over his playing when he was young. Apparently they were very much the masterminds behind marketing, crowdfunding this game, pitching it to people. But you know what? The guys who have bought this at Play Monster, the CEO came out and said what he loved about this game was the creativity involved. And the idea is you kind of build your own taco and you kind of have different levels of whether or not it's healthy, and you get scores from whether or not it's sort of you compete against each other, and apparently it's very appealing between the generations. So he's done something right. I'm just kicking myself that we didn't think of it in our household. I'm clearly not enough of a tiger mum.
And I don't know about you, Freddie, but you are a parent. I don't know what is the word for a tiger dad. I know there's a tiger mom. I'm not sure what the phrase is for a father. Have your kids come up with anything like this or inspired to become millionaires?
I don't know what the opposite of a tiger dad is, but I think that's me. I'm not. It's not that I'm not hard on them. I give them a very hard time for not being entrepreneurial, and I would love them to come up with schemes, but I don't help them in any way. I let them come up with their own ideas. Actually, one of my children is quite entrepreneurial, so I'm hoping that he's going to come up with some genius scheme that will mean my wife and I can retire in comfort. But at the moment, there's no sign of it.
Well, the next Elon Musk might be on the cards coming from your house, Freddie. But, Freddie, let's talk about the UK Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch. And she's made a really rather odd remark about her faith in God. Tell us a little bit more about this puzzling story.
Well, it is puzzling. So Kemi Badenoch has been in charge of the Tory party now for about a year. It's not gone well. I think it's fair to say it's not gone well. She came in with great expectations. She was supposed to be this cultural warrior and so on. And the Tories have slid terribly in the polls. The Conservative Party have dipped in the polls. And she is trying to do lots of interviews to show that she is an interesting human being, that she's a charismatic leader and so on. And in one of these interviews yesterday with the BBC, she said that she stopped believing in God because of Joseph Fritzl, who is a terrible sexual criminal from Belgium. Am I right in saying Belgium? Belgium, yes. And and that she was praying to God and saying to God, why are my prayers being answered but not those of Joseph Fritzl? Which suggests a sort of childish level of understanding about evil, I think. Has it never occurred to her that evil things happened before? This was in her mid-20s.
And Isabel...
and I think it... it also just shows that she's quite a peculiar person, that she thinks that's an interesting story.
Do you find that story interesting at all, Isabel? Would that inspire you to follow Kemi Badenoch as a political figurehead?
I don't think I'm necessarily her target audience. I've met and interviewed her as well on a number of occasions, and she is quite odd. But the trouble with her is she's really inherited a poison chalice. Whoever was going to take over as leader of the Conservative Party needed to be able to withstand the pressure that is being put on the traditional right-wing party of this country from Nigel Farage. But as we've discussed earlier in the programme, we are living in the era of these huge personality politicians, whether it's Trump, like him or loathe him, whether it's Putin. She just doesn't cut it. She's an odd character. She was also in the headlines today talking about having put her hand up and exposed somebody in her class when she was at school in Nigeria as a cheat. And she was really quite gleeful and delighted with herself about this and couldn't understand why she wasn't praised for this. Then this poor 14-year-old boy went on to be expelled. So she exposed herself as being hugely lacking in empathy and just strange in who she thinks that appeals to. Yes, nobody likes a cheat, but isn't that just a bit extreme? This is just a school exam. It wasn't even A-levels. So she's a bit of an oddball. I think we're just going to watch the Conservative Party here in the UK probably eat itself in the next little while, which, I think is sad to see, but I just don't think she's got the vision. That being said, I think, Fritzl, by the way, I think Freddie was Austrian. I say this because I am a little bit Belgian and I take huge offence at the heritage there.
Sorry, Isabel.
But no, Joseph Fritzl, I mean, you're totally right. Who gets to their late 20s and hasn't ever contemplated evil before as a doubt as to whether or not there's a God? What was it about the particular evil that Joseph Fritzl committed? I don't know. It's just very strange, kind of funny, but also kind of tragic as well.
Yes, and he's still in an Austrian jail, and he's now a fairly old man. We looked that up, didn't we, Freddie? 1935 he was born in. But, Freddie, I did want to ask you, you've met your fair share of political leaders and figures from around the world, and if Kemi Badenoch wants to make herself a little bit more likeable and, as Isabel said, not to be eaten alive in the polls, what advice would you give to her?
Oh, I thought you were about to say I've met my fair share of serial killers.
Sorry about that. I don't know if you have.
I've met, not to my knowledge, but I've met some leaders. I think I don't have any good advice compared to her. I just think she's not quite up to the job, and I think she was promoted, and there was a lot of excitement about her. But I think any fair analyst would say she's failing, and probably it's not the right job for her.
Fair point. Thank you so much to today's guests, broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster in Surrey and deputy editor of The Spectator, Freddy Gray, who, of course, joins us from London. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. GNT with Michal Prendergast is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you for watching.